Ryan Caldwell strode into the grand hall of New York Central Station, his polished leather shoes clicking against the marble floors. The station, bustling with travelers clutching tickets and suitcases, seemed a world apart from the exclusivity Ryan was accustomed to. Adjusting the lapel of his tailored suit, he weaved through the crowd, his eyes set on the departure board, flashing the 10:15 express train to Boston. A small mishap earlier that morning, a flat tire on his prized Aston Martin, had forced Ryan to take the train. The thought of sitting among strangers for hours made his jaw tighten, but the urgency of his business meeting left him no choice. As he approached the first-class car, a middle-aged conductor in a crisp uniform nodded. "Good morning, sir. Ticket, please." Ryan handed over his digital ticket with a curt nod, stepping onto the train. The plush leather seats of the first-class cabin offered some solace, but the faint murmur of nearby passengers grated on his nerves. Moments later, an elderly woman in a modest wool coat entered the cabin. Her silver hair was tied neatly in a bun, and her eyes, though softened by time, carried an undeniable strength. She moved deliberately, leaning slightly on a worn wooden cane as she searched for her assigned seat. Ryan barely noticed her until she paused beside him. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her voice steady but kind. "I believe that's my seat." Ryan glanced up from his phone, furrowing his brow. "I think you're mistaken," he replied, gesturing vaguely at the empty seats around them. "There are plenty of others available." The woman smiled faintly, holding up her ticket. "This is seat 3A. Yours must be another." Frustration flickered in Ryan's expression as he begrudgingly moved aside. "Fine," he muttered, sliding to the next seat without meeting her gaze. "But you could have sat anywhere else." Eleanor settled into her seat gracefully. "Thank you," she said simply, folding her hands over her cane. The train lurched forward, and Ryan resumed scrolling through emails on his phone. He barely noticed the curious glances from other passengers who had overheard his curt tone. Eleanor, meanwhile, gazed out the window, her serene expression unshaken. As the train gained speed, Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearly agitated by Eleanor's calm demeanor. "You know," he began, his voice laced with condescension, "most people would avoid traveling first class if they couldn't afford it." A few heads turned. Eleanor tilted her head, meeting his gaze with a calm intensity. "And what makes you think I can't afford it?" she asked. Ryan smirked. "Let's just say you don't look the part." The murmurs grew louder as other passengers exchanged uneasy looks. A young man in a hoodie whispered to his companion, "Who does this guy think he is?" But Eleanor remained composed. "Appearances," she said softly, "can be deceiving, Mr. Caldwell." Ryan froze. "How do you know my name?" Eleanor smiled enigmatically, lifting her cane to point at the monogrammed briefcase by his feet. "I have good eyesight," she said, "and perhaps a bit of experience reading people." Her reply caught him off guard, but before he could retort, the train conductor passed by, breaking the tension. When the train arrived at its next stop, Eleanor gathered her belongings and rose from her seat. As she walked toward the exit, she paused beside Ryan. Reaching into her pocket, she withdrew a small folded piece of paper and placed it gently on his tray table. Ryan stared at it, perplexed. "What's this?" "A reminder," she replied with a knowing smile. "When you're ready to understand, come find me." Before he could respond, she stepped off the train and disappeared into the crowd on the platform. Unfolding the note, Ryan read the neatly handwritten words. "If you want to change your life, visit me at 246 Hawthorne Street." He stared at the note, feeling a strange mix of irritation and curiosity. Who was this woman? And why did she seem to know more about him than he was comfortable admitting? The train resumed its journey, but Ryan found it impossible to focus on his emails. He gazed out the window, the piece of paper resting in his hand, unaware that the wheels of change had already begun turning. The skyscraper glinted in the midday sun, reflecting the vastness of New York City. Inside its upper floors, the headquarters of Caldwell Innovations hummed with energy. Employees scurried through glass-walled offices, each immersed in the relentless pace that Ryan Caldwell had set for his tech empire. At 32, Ryan was a symbol of modern success, a sharp, calculating mind who had turned an innovative software idea into a billion-dollar enterprise. The climb had been meteoric. From the moment he launched his startup in his cramped college dorm, Ryan had worked tirelessly, sacrificing sleep, friendships, and relationships to reach the pinnacle of his industry. The accolades were countless: magazine covers, keynote speeches, and industry awards. But beneath the polished exterior lay a man whose world was beginning to feel emptier with each passing day. A framed photo on his desk caught the sunlight, momentarily distracting him from his spreadsheet. It was of his mother, Evelyn, her smile warm and inviting, her arm around a much younger Ryan. The photo had been taken the summer before she passed away, before the pressures of building an empire had consumed his life. He reached for the frame, his fingers hesitating just before touching the glass. Evelyn had been his grounding force, constantly reminding him to seek purpose beyond success. But her death left a void he had tried to fill with accolades and wealth to no avail. That evening, Ryan attended a lavish party at one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop bars. The city skyline stretched out in all directions, a sparkling sea of lights. Waiters in tuxedos glided between clusters of impeccably dressed guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Ryan stood at the edge of the crowd, a drink in hand, surrounded by people who only knew the version of him displayed in glossy magazines. "Ryan, over here," a familiar voice called out. Turning, he saw Damon, an old college acquaintance turned hedge fund manager, flanked by a small group. Damon greeted him with a handshake and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still on top of the world, I see." Ryan forced a smile. "You know how it is. Never a dull moment." As the night wore on, Ryan caught snippets of conversations, some louder than intended. He overheard two guests whispering about him near the bar. "Arrogant, isn't he? Thinks his money makes him untouchable. Well, they say Caldwell Innovations isn't as clean as it seems. Something about unethical practices overseas." The words stung more than Ryan cared to admit. He excused himself and left the party early, the laughter and clinking glasses fading behind him as he stepped into the cool night air. The city, usually so full of life, felt hollow. He walked aimlessly through the streets, the distant hum of traffic his only companion. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the office to find an email from the company's legal department flagged as urgent. He scanned the contents, his stomach twisting as he read. A whistleblower had accused Caldwell Innovations of exploiting loopholes in labor laws overseas, and a major news outlet was preparing an exposé. His assistant, Natalie, entered the office tentatively. "The PR team is drafting a statement," she said, "but we'll need to address this head-on." Ryan nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a bizarre crisis. It was the result of a culture he had cultivated, one that prioritized profit over principle. He glanced at his desk, and his eyes fell on the folded piece of paper Eleanor had given him on the train. "If you want to change your life, visit me at 246 Hawthorne Street." He picked it up, staring at the neat handwriting. What did he have to lose? With the walls closing in around him, Ryan decided to take a chance. That afternoon, Ryan stood outside a modest brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. The address Eleanor had left led him here, a world away from the glitzy skyscrapers and luxury cars that defined his life. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. A few moments later, it creaked open to reveal Eleanor, her eyes warm but curious. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and amusement. "I didn't think you'd come so soon." Ryan straightened his jacket, his usual confidence faltering under her steady gaze. "I'm not sure why I'm here," he admitted. "But I think I need your help." Eleanor stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Then you've come to the right place," she said simply, closing the door behind him. What awaited Ryan inside would challenge everything he believed about himself and his carefully constructed world. As Ryan stepped into Eleanor's home, he was struck by how different it was from the penthouses and offices he frequented. The air carried a faint scent of lavender and aged wood. The living room was modest, but inviting, filled with books stacked on shelves and scattered across a well-worn coffee table. A faded armchair sat near a small window, its cushion indented from years of use. Photographs lined the walls, images of a young Eleanor, a man who seemed to be her late husband, and a boy with a wide grin, who Ryan assumed was her son. The space exuded warmth and a sense of history. It was a stark contrast to his own sterile, minimalist penthouse that screamed wealth but offered little comfort. He couldn't help but feel out of place as Eleanor motioned for him to sit on a patched-up sofa. "You've built quite the empire," Eleanor said, taking a seat across from him. Her tone was neutral, but her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through his polished exterior. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose you could say that. Though lately, it feels more like I'm running in circles." Eleanor studied him for a moment before standing. "Titi?" she asked, already heading to the kitchen. Ryan nodded, unsure how to respond. He looked around the room again, noticing small details he had missed earlier. A hand-knitted throw draped over the armchair, a collection of antique clocks on the mantel, and a pair of well-worn gardening gloves by the door. Everything seemed to tell a story, though he couldn't quite piece it together. When Eleanor returned with 2 steaming mugs, she handed one to Ryan and settled back into her chair. "Why did you come here, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. Ryan hesitated, gripping the warm mug in his hands. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Maybe I thought you could tell me." Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "People like you don't usually end up on my doorstep unless something is wrong. So tell me what's troubling you." Ryan sighed, leaning back into the sofa. "Everything," he said. "My company is under investigation. My so-called friends only care about what I can do for them. And lately, I've been wondering if any of this success even means anything." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "You've built a castle in the sky, Mr. Caldwell. But castles like that often lack a foundation. They look impressive, but the first strong wind can bring them down." Her words stung, but Ryan couldn't deny their truth. He sipped his tea, avoiding her gaze. Eleanor leaned forward. "Tell me, Ryan, when was the last time you did something purely for someone else? No profit, no recognition, just to help?" Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know," he admitted. "Well," Eleanor said, her tone light but firm, "it's time to find out." She stood and retrieved a worn notebook from a nearby shelf. Flipping through its pages, she stopped at a list scrawled in neat handwriting. "I have a challenge for you," she said, handing him the notebook. "Spend a week with me, Live in my world. No suits, no business meetings, no assistants. Just you, learning what it means to connect with people and make a difference." Ryan stared at her, incredulous. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Eleanor said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "But the choice is yours. You can walk out that door and go back to your hollow empire. Or you can stay and see what happens when you stop chasing and start living." Ryan considered her words, torn between skepticism and curiosity. On one hand, the idea seemed absurd. He had a company to save, a reputation to protect. But on the other hand, something about Eleanor intrigued him. She seemed so sure, so grounded in a way he couldn't quite understand. "What's in it for you?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Eleanor chuckled. "Let's just say I've learned a thing or two about people like you. I don't expect you to change overnight, but maybe, just maybe, you'll see the world a little differently when we're done." Ryan stared at the notebook in his hands. It was filled with lists, schedules, and notes. Evidence of a life lived intentionally, with purpose. Finally, he set his mug down and met her gaze. "All right," he said. "I'll do it. But don't expect a miracle." Eleanor's smile widened. "Miracles aren't my specialty, Mr. Caldwell. But transformation? That's something I know a thing or two about." The next morning, Ryan arrived at Eleanor's house, dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater, an outfit that felt alien to him. Eleanor greeted him with a knowing smile and handed him a clipboard. "Your itinerary for the day," she said. "And remember, no cutting corners." Ryan glanced at the list, his brows furrowing as he read. Soup kitchen volunteering, community cleanup, and a visit to the neighborhood youth center. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. "Not at all," Eleanor said cheerfully. "You wanted to know what life is like without the safety net of wealth and privilege. This is it." As Ryan followed Eleanor out the door and into a world far removed from his own, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much larger than himself. What he didn't know was that this week would challenge not only his perception of the world, but also his understanding of who he was and who he wanted to become. The air was brisk as Ryan followed Eleanor through a narrow alley to a modest brick building. A faded sign above the door read, "Hope Haven Soup Kitchen." Inside, the hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of pots and pans. Volunteers moved swiftly, ladling soup into bowls and handing out sandwiches to a line of people that stretched out the door. Ryan hesitated near the entrance, the unfamiliar environment making him uneasy. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but the sheer humanity of the place caught him off guard. Eleanor handed him an apron, her smile unrelenting. "Let's see what you're made of," she said. As Ryan stepped behind the serving counter, a wiry man in his 50s with a toothy grin approached. "You're new here," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Tom. Welcome to the chaos." Ryan shook his hand, feeling a spark of warmth he hadn't expected. Eleanor took her place beside Ryan, showing him how to serve portions efficiently while engaging with the patrons. As they worked, Ryan found himself listening to the stories of those who came through the line. A mother juggling 2 jobs to feed her kids, a young veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life, an elderly man whose savings had been wiped out by medical bills. One story in particular stuck with him. A woman named Maria shared how she had lost her home after her husband's sudden death. "But I'm grateful for places like this," she said, clutching a bowl of soup. "People like Eleanor remind me that there's still kindness in the world." Ryan glanced at Eleanor, who simply shrugged. "It's not about grand gestures," she said. "It's about showing up." By the end of the day, Ryan was exhausted but oddly fulfilled. As he removed his apron, Tom clapped him on the back. "Not bad for a first-timer," he said. "Hope to see you again." Ryan managed a weak smile. "We'll see." The next morning, Ryan arrived at Eleanor's house, still processing the previous day. Eleanor greeted him with 2 cups of coffee and a stack of old photo albums. "Today you learn a little more about me," she said. As they sat in the cozy living room, Eleanor flipped through the pages, pointing out pictures of her younger self. "I was a lawyer once," she began. "Corporate law, big firm, high stakes. I was good at it. Ruthless even." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Hard to imagine." Eleanor chuckled. "I know. But life has a way of humbling you." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. It showed a boy of about 10, grinning from ear to ear as he held a baseball bat. "That's my son, Henry." Ryan noticed the shift in her tone. "What happened to him?" he asked gently. Eleanor's eyes grew distant. "He died in a car accident when he was 16. A drunk driver ran a red light. It shattered my world." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sorry," he said. Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the photo. "Losing Henry made me realize how fleeting life is. All the money, all the success. It meant nothing without him. So I left it all behind. I sold my house, my car, everything, and I decided to dedicate my life to helping others." Ryan sat in silence, the weight of Eleanor's story sinking in. He thought about his own mother, how she had always encouraged him to use his talents for good. A pang of guilt hit him as he realized how far he had strayed from her teachings. On the 3rd day, Eleanor took Ryan to a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The area was run down, with boarded-up windows and overgrown lawns. "This is where the real work happens," Eleanor said, as they joined a group of volunteers cleaning up the streets. Ryan found himself paired with a boy named Jamal, who couldn't have been more than 12. As they picked up litter and cleared debris, Jamal talked about his dreams of becoming an engineer. "But my school doesn't have much," he admitted. "We don't even have a science lab." Ryan was struck by the boy's determination, despite the odds stacked against him. He couldn't help but think of the resources he had taken for granted growing up. When Jamal asked Ryan what he did for a living, he hesitated. "I work in technology," he said simply. "That's cool," Jamal said, his eyes lighting up. "Maybe one day I can do that too." Later that day, Ryan vented his frustrations to Eleanor. "Do you really think cleaning up a few streets and serving soup is going to change anything?" he asked. "These problems are so much bigger than that." Eleanor remained calm. "You're right, Ryan. The problems are big. But change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small steps, with people caring enough to do something." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Open this when you're ready," she said. Back at his hotel room that night, Ryan opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Change begins with a single action. The ripple effects will surprise you." Below it was a list of names, people Eleanor had helped over the years. Each name represented a story, a life changed by her kindness. Ryan felt a knot in his chest. He realized he had been so focused on the scale of the problem that he had overlooked the impact of individual actions. The next morning, Ryan arrived at Eleanor's house with a newfound determination. "All right," he said, meeting her gaze. "What's next?" Eleanor smiled, handing him another clipboard. "Oh, just the usual," she said lightly. But there was a glimmer of pride in her eyes, as if she knew that something within Ryan had shifted. What neither of them realized was that this week would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only Ryan's perception of the world, but also his understanding of himself and the true legacy he wanted to leave behind. The week's activities weighed heavily on Ryan's mind as he sat alone in Eleanor's modest living room. The walls were lined with books and photos, each telling a story of a life rich in meaning, a stark contrast to the hollow luxury of his penthouse. A quiet evening stretched before him, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was accusatory. Eleanor entered with 2 steaming cups of tea, her calm presence filling the room. She sat across from him, her keen eyes studying his expression. "Something's bothering you," she said, her voice gentle but probing. Ryan hesitated, the words caught in his throat. I don't know if I can do this," he finally admitted, his voice cracking. "I've built my whole life on success, power, and control. But here, none of that matters." Eleanor leaned forward, placing her cup on the table. "Why do you think that is?" Ryan exhaled sharply. Because I've been living a lie," he said, his voice rising with emotion. "I told myself that achieving wealth would fill the emptiness I felt after my mom died. But it didn't. It only made it worse." Eleanor's gaze softened, and she reached out to place a comforting hand on his. "Tell me about her." For a moment, Ryan was silent, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Then, slowly, he began to speak. The memory was vivid, as though it had happened yesterday. Ryan was 17, standing in the hospital room where his mother lay weak but smiling. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words were etched into his soul. "Ryan," she said, her hand resting lightly on his, "you're smart, you're talented, but none of that matters if you don't use those gifts to make the world better." He had nodded, too young to fully grasp the weight of her words. "I will, Mom," he had promised. But in the years that followed, that promise had been buried under layers of ambition and greed. The flashback ended, and Ryan found himself staring at the floor. "I let her down," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've become everything she wouldn't have wanted me to be." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But the fact that you see that now means there's still hope. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The following day, Ryan threw himself into the community work with renewed vigor. At the soup kitchen, he volunteered to handle the toughest jobs, scrubbing pots, hauling crates of food, even cleaning the bathrooms. The physical labor was grueling, but it grounded him in a way he hadn't expected. During a break, he found himself talking to Maria, the widowed mother he had met on his first day. She shared more about her struggles, including her efforts to put her daughter through school. "It's not easy," she said, "but I tell my little girl every day that hard work and kindness can change the world." Her words struck a chord, reminding Ryan of his mother's wisdom. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of purpose. One evening, as the week drew to a close, Eleanor invited Ryan to a small community gathering at a local park. Families, volunteers, and children filled the space, their laughter and conversation creating an atmosphere of warmth and joy. A makeshift stage had been set up, and Eleanor was invited to speak. Standing under the soft glow of string lights, Eleanor addressed the crowd. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures," she said. "It happens here, in places like this, among people who care about each other." Ryan watched from the sidelines, her words resonating deeply. As the applause faded, Eleanor approached him with a knowing smile. "Care to share a few words?" she asked. He hesitated but eventually nodded, stepping onto the stage. "I came here thinking I had all the answers," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "But the truth is, I had a lot to learn. This week has shown me that real success isn't measured by wealth or power. It's measured by the impact we have on others." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ryan stepped down, feeling a mixture of vulnerability and liberation. Eleanor's smile widened. Now, you're starting to get it. As they walked back to her house that night, Eleanor dropped a bombshell. Ryan, she said, her tone serious, I knew who you were the moment I saw you on that train. He stopped in his tracks, staring at her in disbelief. You knew? She nodded. Your face has been in the news for years. But I didn't see Ryan Caldwell, the millionaire. I saw a man who needed a second chance. Ryan shook his head, overwhelmed. Why didn't you say anything? Because you needed to figure it out for yourself, she replied simply. And you did. Back in her living room, Eleanor handed Ryan a small, worn notebook. This belonged to my son, she said. He kept it to jot down ideas for how he wanted to change the world. Maybe it'll inspire you. Ryan opened the notebook, its pages filled with sketches, quotes, and dreams. One line stood out. The smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest ripples. As he closed the notebook, Ryan looked at Eleanor with newfound determination. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. Eleanor smiled. Don't thank me yet. The real work is just beginning. Unbeknownst to them, Ryan's transformation was about to face its greatest test. The world he had tried to escape was closing in, and the lessons he had learned would soon be put to the ultimate challenge. It was early morning when Ryan's phone buzzed incessantly, pulling him from an uneasy sleep. He reached for it, groggy, but the headlines glaring back at him jolted him fully awake. Caldwell Tech faces corruption scandal. Investigations underway. The words blurred momentarily as his mind raced. The article detailed accusations of unethical practices in Caldwell Tech, including predatory pricing and exploitative labor conditions in overseas factories. These weren't just rumors. There were alleged documents and whistleblower testimonies. His chest tightened as he realized the scale of the storm heading his way. Before he could process it fully, another notification popped up. A scathing message from one of the company's largest investors. It was short, but damning. Fix this, or we're out. Ryan paced Eleanor's living room, his mind in turmoil. Eleanor sat quietly, observing him with her characteristic calm. Everything I've built is crumbling, Ryan muttered, his voice thick with frustration and fear. My reputation, my company, it's all gone. Eleanor finally spoke, her tone steady. Ryan, you have two choices. Fight to salvage what you can, or let it fall and rebuild something better. What's it going to be? He stopped pacing, staring at her incredulously. Rebuild? Do you have any idea how many people are depending on me? My employees, my investors, and how many of them are suffering because of the practices that brought you here? Eleanor interrupted, her words cutting through his excuses. You've been given a chance to face the truth. Use it. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ryan felt as if the walls of the room were closing in. But beneath his panic, a flicker of resolve began to grow. Ryan reached out to Eleanor's network of former colleagues, an eclectic mix of lawyers, activists, and ethical business consultants. Among them was Meredith Clark, a no-nonsense attorney known for taking on corporate giants. Meredith met Ryan with a skeptical gaze. I've read the reports, she said bluntly. Why should I help you? What makes you any different from the CEOs I've fought against my entire career? Ryan took a deep breath. Because I'm not the same person who made those decisions. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right, whatever it takes. Meredith studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. But if you're serious about this, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. The team began poring over documents and internal reports from Caldwell Tech, seeking evidence that could exonerate Ryan while exposing the deeper issues. The process was grueling, and every new revelation felt like a blow to Ryan's already fragile sense of control. As the scandal unfolded, the media descended like vultures. Paparazzi camped outside Eleanor's house, forcing Ryan to slip in and out through a back entrance. Headlines painted him as either a fallen prodigy or a calculating villain, depending on the outlet. Eleanor remained a steady presence, reminding him to stay focused. "They'll say what they want to say," she told him. "Your job is to show them the truth." Ryan decided to take control of the narrative. Against the advice of his PR team, he announced a press conference to address the allegations directly. The conference room was packed with journalists, their cameras and microphones trained on Ryan as he stepped up to the podium. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. "I won't stand here and deny the allegations against Caldwell Tech," he said. "The truth is, I've made mistakes that have hurt people. And for that, I take full responsibility." The room buzzed with murmurs. This wasn't the usual corporate denial they were expecting. Ryan continued, "But acknowledging my mistakes isn't enough. That's why I'm committing to a full audit of Caldwell Tech, led by an independent team, to uncover and address any unethical practices. I'm also establishing a fund to support the workers and communities affected by these practices." A reporter stood up, her voice sharp. "What about your investors? Are you prepared to face lawsuits if your stock continues to plummet?" Ryan met her gaze. "If doing the right thing means losing investors, so be it. I didn't start this company just to make money. I started it to make a difference, and it's time I lived up to that." The room erupted into a mix of applause and questions as Ryan stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding. He had just placed everything on the line, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity. The fallout was immediate. Some investors withdrew their support, leading to a sharp drop in Caldwell Tech's stock price. Critics labeled Ryan's actions as naive and reckless. But amid the backlash came an outpouring of support. Employees who had been silenced by fear began sharing their stories, praising Ryan's willingness to take responsibility. Grassroots organizations and advocacy groups reached out, offering partnerships to help implement the changes he promised. That evening, Ryan returned to Eleanor's house, exhausted but hopeful. She greeted him with her usual calm demeanor, a small smile playing on her lips. "You did well," she said simply. Ryan slumped into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "It doesn't feel like it. Half the world thinks I'm a fool." "Maybe you are," Eleanor said with a chuckle. "But sometimes it takes a fool to start a revolution." Her words brought a rare smile to Ryan's face. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that change was possible. As Ryan prepared to leave Eleanor's for the night, his phone buzzed with a message from Meredith. It was a single line. "We've found something. Call me." Ryan's pulse quickened. What had they uncovered? Was it the proof they needed to take the next step, or another bombshell waiting to explode? As he stared at the screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. What lay ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it. The morning after the press conference, Ryan sat in his office, staring at the headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Tech prodigy Ryan Caldwell faces backlash after public confession, read one, while another declared, "Caldwell Tech, redemption or ruin." The articles dissected his every word and action, some with praise, others with harsh criticism. Despite the noise, Ryan felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, he had stopped running from his mistakes. Now, he was ready to face them head on. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Meredith Clark entered, her expression both serious and determined. She placed a thick folder on his desk. "We need to talk," she said. "This is bigger than we thought." Meredith explained that her team had unearthed evidence of widespread corruption within Caldwell Tech's supply chain. Subcontractors had been engaging in illegal practices, including unsafe working conditions and falsified certifications, all while funneling profits back into offshore accounts. Ryan felt his stomach drop. "How could this have happened without me knowing?" he asked, his voice strained. "Because you trusted the wrong people," Meredith replied bluntly. "Your COO, Martin Fields, signed off on most of these deals." Martin had been with Ryan since the early days of Caldwell Tech. The betrayal stung deeply. Meredith continued, "If we act fast, we can bring this to light on our terms. But you need to be ready for the fallout." Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. "Do whatever it takes." That evening, Ryan visited Eleanor to share the news. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable. "It feels like, the more I try to fix things, the more broken they become," Ryan admitted. "What if I'm in over my head?" Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his. "Growth is never easy, Ryan. It's messy and painful, but it's also necessary. The question is, are you willing to endure it?" Her words resonated deeply. Ryan realized that this wasn't just about saving his company. It was about becoming the man he wanted to be. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ryan and Meredith worked tirelessly to prepare for a second press conference, one that would lay everything bare. Meanwhile, Ryan reached out to employees, investors, and community leaders, determined to rebuild the trust he had lost. At a town hall meeting with employees, Ryan faced a wave of anger and frustration. A factory worker named Maria spoke passionately about the hardships her family had endured because of Caldwell Tech's decisions. Ryan listened intently, his heart heavy. When she finished, he stood and addressed the rooms. "I can't undo the damage that's been done," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make it right." His sincerity struck a chord. While not everyone was convinced, a few began to see the potential for change. Ryan and his team drafted a bold plan to overhaul Caldwell Tech's operations. The proposal included shutting down unethical subcontractors, creating new oversight committees, and reallocating resources to support sustainable practices. The changes came at a cost. Ryan announced that he would take no salary for the next year and sell personal assets to fund the transition. It was a risky move, but he knew it was necessary. Eleanor, always his sounding board, reviewed the plan with him late one night. "You're putting everything on the line," she said, her tone equal parts admirations and concern. "I have to," Ryan replied. "If I don't, then what's the point?" The next major hurdle was gaining the approval of Caldwell Tech's board of directors. The meeting was tense from the start, with several members openly questioning Ryan's leadership. "This plan is reckless," one board member said. "You're asking us to gamble the company's future on idealism." "It's not a gamble," Ryan countered. "It's a calculated risk, and it's the only way to ensure Caldwell Tech has a future at all." He presented the evidence of corruption and outlined the steps needed to rebuild. His passions and transparency won over some skeptics, but others remained wary. Finally, one of the oldest board members spoke up. "I've been in this business a long time," she said, "and I've seen what happens when leaders prioritize profits over people. I think it's time we try something different." The motion passed by a narrow margin. Ryan left the meeting exhausted but relieved. It was a small victory but a crucial one. Amid the chaos, Ryan began noticing subtle changes in Eleanor. She seemed more fatigued, her movements slower. When he pressed her, she brushed off his concerns. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Focus on what you need to do." But Ryan couldn't ignore the worry gnawing at him. One evening, he found a prescription bottle on her kitchen counter. The label confirmed his fears. Eleanor was battling a serious illness. Confronting her, Ryan demanded answers. Eleanor sighed, finally admitting the truth. She had been diagnosed with a terminal illness months ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan asked, his voice breaking. "Because this isn't about me," Eleanor said gently. "It's about you finding your purpose, and you have." The day of the second press conference arrived. Ryan stood before the crowd, his team behind him, and began to speak. "We're here today to take responsibility," he said, "to acknowledge the mistakes we've made and outline the steps we're taking to correct them." He detailed the findings of their investigation and the actions Caldwell Tech was implementing. He also announced the creation of a fund to support workers and communities affected by the company's past practices. The response was mixed. Some applauded his transparency, while others remained skeptical. But Ryan knew it was a step in the right direction. After the press conference, Ryan received a call from Meredith. "We've uncovered something else," she said, her tone urgent. "It's about Martin Fields. You need to see this." Ryan's heart sank as he realized the fight was far from over. He glanced at Eleanor, who nodded silently, her presence a source of strength. As he ended the call, Ryan knew the next battle would test him even further. But with Eleanor's guidance and the lessons he'd learned, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The morning after Meredith's urgent call, Ryan arrived at Caldwell Tech's headquarters, a mixture of dread and determination in his chest. Meredith was waiting in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of documents and a laptop, open to a series of incriminating emails. "Ryan," she began, her tone serious, "we've traced Martin Fields' activities back further than we thought. He's not just complicit, he's been orchestrating deals with some of the worst offenders in our supply chain." Ryan leaned forward, scanning the emails. The evidence was damning: secret meetings, bribes, and directives to overlook violations in exchange for kickbacks. Martin, his trusted COO and longtime colleague, had been systematically undermining the company for years. "Why?" Ryan whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Meredith's face softened. "Greed, power, maybe resentment. Whatever the reason, he's jeopardized everything." Determined to get answers, Ryan stormed into Martin's office without knocking. Martin looked up, startled, but quickly composed himself. "Ryan," he said smoothly, "what's going on?" Ryan threw the printed emails onto the desk. "You tell me, Martin. How long have you been doing this? How long have you been profiting off the backs of exploited workers while pretending to have this company's best interests at heart?" Martin's expression hardened as he realized the game was up. "You wouldn't understand," he said coldly. "This company became too big, too fast. Someone had to ensure its survival." "By betraying everything we stand for?" Ryan shot back. "By betraying me?" Martin's facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger. "You were so focused on your ideals, you didn't see the reality. This is how the world works, Ryan. It's ugly, but it's necessary." Ryan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You're done here," he said firmly. "I'm reporting this to the board and the authorities. Pack your things." As Ryan turned to leave, Martin's voice stopped him. "You'll regret this. Without me, Caldwell Tech will crumble." Ryan paused, then glanced back. If it does, at least it will fall with integrity, something you wouldn't understand. Later that evening, Ryan visited Eleanor to share what had happened. She listened intently, her calm presence soothing his frayed nerves. "You did the right thing," she said, after he finished recounting the confrontation. "It doesn't feel like it," Ryan admitted. "I trusted him. I thought we were building something meaningful together." Eleanor placed a hand on his. "Trust is a risk, Ryan. Sometimes it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't. But you can't let betrayal define you. Learn from it, grow from it, and keep moving forward." Her words stayed with him long after he left. Determined to make amends for the harm Caldwell Tech had caused, Ryan launched an initiative to visit affected communities. One of his first stops was the shuttered factory George Whitman had taken him to, where he met Peter, the former worker whose story had haunted him. Ryan stood in front of a small crowd of ex-employees and local residents, his heart pounding. "I'm not here to make excuses," he began. "I'm here to apologize and to start making things right." He outlined plans to reopen the factory, implement ethical practices, and prioritize hiring from the local community. The response was mixed. Some were hopeful, others skeptical. But Ryan knew he had to prove his sincerity through action. One afternoon, Peter approached Ryan with an old photo. It showed a younger Peter, working alongside Ryan's mother at a charity event years ago. "She was a good woman," Peter said. "She believed in helping people, no matter their circumstances." Ryan stared at the photo, memories of his mother flooding back. Her unwavering kindness, her belief in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He realized that her values were what he needed to channel into his work. "That's what I want this company to be," he said quietly. "A force for good." As Ryan's efforts gained momentum, the media began to take notice. Reporters visited the reopened factory, documenting the changes and interviewing workers. While some praised his efforts, others questioned his motives, suggesting it was a PR stunt to save his reputation. Eleanor, watching one such report with Ryan, chuckled. "They'll always have something to say," she remarked. "What matters is what you're doing, not what they think." Ryan nodded, but the criticism still stung. He channeled that frustration into working harder, determined to let his actions speak louder than words. One evening, George Whitman called Ryan with surprising news. "I've been approached by a group of investors interested in supporting your vision," George said. "They're impressed by what you're doing and want to help." Ryan was cautious, but agreed to meet with them. The investors, a mix of philanthropists and socially conscious entrepreneurs, proposed a partnership to expand Caldwell Tech's initiatives. Their support would provide the resources needed to implement sustainable practices across the company's entire supply chain. As Ryan celebrated this breakthrough with his team, Meredith pulled him aside. Her expression was grave. "Ryan, we've found something else," she said, handing him a USB drive. "It's a recording from one of Martin's meetings. You need to hear this." Ryan plugged the drive into his laptop, his stomach tightening as he listened. The recording revealed a deeper conspiracy. Martin hadn't acted alone. A network of powerful figures had been benefiting from Caldwell Tech's unethical practices, and they weren't going to let Ryan's reforms go unchallenged. As the recording ended, Ryan sat back, his mind racing. The fight was far from over, and the stakes had just been raised. "Eleanor was right," he muttered. "Growth is messy, but I'm not backing down." Ryan's resolve hardened as he prepared for the battles ahead. The past was catching up to him, but with Eleanor's wisdom, his team's support, and his renewed sense of purpose, he was ready to face whatever came next. The journey to redemption was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Caldwell Tech's new office in the heart of the city. Gone were the cold, imposing glass walls of the old building. This space, designed with natural light, open collaboration areas, and green plants everywhere, symbolized Ryan's commitment to change. Employees bustled around with a renewed sense of purpose, energized by the recent shifts in company values. Ryan stood in the center of the main floor, addressing his staff in an impromptu meeting. "We're not just rebuilding Caldwell Tech," he began, his voice firm yet earnest. "We're reimagining what it can buy. It's not just about profits anymore. It's about people, communities, and the planet. This is our chance to lead by example." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Meredith, standing beside him, gave a small nod of approval. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also saw a side of Ryan she hadn't before. A leader truly inspired by a greater vision. That afternoon, Ryan met with Eleanor, George, and a small group of trusted advisors in a sunlit conference room. The air buzzed with ideas as they discussed the next steps for Caldwell Tech. "We need to start with transparency," Meredith suggested, tapping on her tablet. "We publish detailed reports about every aspect of our operations, supply chains, labor practices, environmental impact. If we're upfront about where we're starting, we'll build trust." "I agree," Eleanor chimed in. "But transparency alone won't cut it. You need bold initiatives. Partner with local communities. Invest in education and training programs. Show people you're not just apologizing, you're taking action." Ryan scribbled notes furiously, his mind racing with possibilities. "What about partnering with nonprofits?" he asked. "Organizations already working in these communities. We can amplify their efforts." "That's a strong move," George said. "It shows humility. You're not pretending to have all the answers, but are willing to collaborate." As the team fleshed out their ideas, Meredith's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. "Ryan, we have a problem." The room fell silent as she played a video clip on her tablet. A high-profile news anchor accused Caldwell Tech of using its new initiatives as a smokescreen to distract from deeper issues. The anchor went on to claim that Ryan's plans were impractical and that the company would likely collapse under the weight of its own reforms. "Who's behind this?" Ryan asked, his jaw tightening. Eleanor frowned. "The people benefiting from the old system. They're scared of losing their power and influence." Ryan straightened his shoulders. "Then we're doing something right. Let's prove them wrong." Determined to counter the negative press, Ryan decided to visit communities impacted by Caldwell Tech's past practices. His first stop was a small town in the Midwest, where a factory had been shut down years ago. He was accompanied by Eleanor and George, who both insisted on being part of the visit. The town's community center was packed with former workers and their families, their faces etched with weariness and skepticism. Ryan took the stage, feeling the weight of their expectations. "I'm not here to make excuses," he began. "I'm here to apologize and to make amends. What happened here was wrong, and I take full responsibility. But I also want to work with you to build something better." He outlined plans to reopen the factory with new ethical practices, providing not just jobs, but also skills training and education opportunities for workers and their families. The room was silent for a moment. Then a woman in the back stood up. "My husband worked at that factory for 20 years, she said, her voice shaking. "When it closed, he lost everything. Why should we believe you now?" Ryan stepped down from the stage and approached her. "Because I've seen what happens when trust is broken," he said. "And I'm here to earn yours, not demand it." Give us a chance to prove ourselves. Her eyes searched his face for a long moment before she nodded. All right, but we'll hold you to it. Back in the city, Eleanor's role as Ryan's advisor became more prominent. She spent hours mentoring him on leadership, compassion, and resilience. One evening, she handed him a worn notebook filled with handwritten notes and ideas. This is for you, she said. It's a collection of lessons I've learned over the years. Maybe it'll help you avoid some of my mistakes. Ryan flipped through the pages, moved by her generosity. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll honor this. Not everyone within Caldwell Tech supported Ryan's vision. At the next board meeting, tensions ran high, as some members argued that the reforms were too costly and risky. We're hemorrhaging money, one board member said. These initiatives are noble, but we're not a charity. Ryan stood his ground. We're not a charity, but we're also not just a profit machine. If we focused only on short-term gains, we'll lose everything: our reputation, our employees, our customers. This is an investment in our future. Eleanor, seated quietly at the back of the room, watched with pride as Ryan navigated the heated discussion. By the end of the meeting, he had convinced a majority of the board to support his plans. As the weeks passed, Ryan's reforms began to show results. The reopened factory in the Midwest became a model for ethical practices, attracting attention from other companies. The media started shifting its tone, with some outlets praising Ryan's efforts as groundbreaking. One evening, Ryan received a letter from Peter, the former factory worker. It was short, but heartfelt. Thank you for giving us hope again. You're not just changing a company. You're changing lives. Ryan folded the letter and tucked it into his notebook from Eleanor. It was a reminder of why he had started this journey. Just as things seemed to be improving, Meredith rushed into Ryan's office with a worried expression. We've intercepted a message, she said, handing him a printout. It's from one of Martin's old contacts. They're planning something big to discredit you. Ryan read the message, his stomach sinking. The people he was fighting against weren't going to back down easily. And this time, they were coming for him personally. He turned to Eleanor, who had just entered the room. We're about to face our biggest challenge yet, he said. Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. Then we'll face it together. It was a crisp autumn morning when Eleanor asked Ryan to meet her at her modest apartment. She had been quieter than usual in recent weeks, often lost in thought, though she maintained her unwavering support for Ryan's efforts. Ryan arrived promptly, curious about her request. The small apartment, filled with books and photos, felt as warm and welcoming as ever. But today, there was a palpable tension in the air. Sit down, Ryan, Eleanor said softly, gesturing to the worn couch. Her voice, typically steady and confident, carried an uncharacteristic tremor. She handed him a cup of tea and took a deep breath before speaking. There's something I need to tell you, she began, her hands clasped tightly together. I've been battling an illness, cancer, for some time now, and it's not looking good. Ryan froze, his heart sinking. Eleanor, why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have... She held up a hand, cutting him off gently. Because this isn't about me. It never has been. My time is limited, Ryan. But I didn't want that to overshadow what we're building. You needed to focus on the work, not worry about me. For the rest of the day, Ryan struggled to process the revelation. Eleanor's presence had become a cornerstone of his transformation. She was more than a mentor. She was a symbol of strength, wisdom, and compassion. The thought of losing her felt unbearable. He found himself wandering the city, reflecting on the profound impact Eleanor had made on his life. Memories of their early encounters played in his mind. Her sharp wit, her unwavering faith in people's ability to change, her quiet determination to make the world better. Each memory reinforced his resolve to honor her legacy. The next morning, Ryan returned to Eleanor's apartment with a new determination. He found her in her small garden, tending to the plants with a peaceful expression. "I won't let your work end here," he said firmly, sitting beside her. "Whatever time we have left, let's use it to finish what we started." Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's all I've ever wanted." Together, they began mapping out the next phase of their vision. Eleanor shared her dream of creating an educational foundation to support underserved communities, providing scholarships, mentorship, and resources to help young people succeed. Ryan promised to make it a reality, no matter the obstacles. As the weeks went by, Eleanor's condition worsened, but her spirit remained unyielding. She insisted on attending the reopening ceremony for a new Caldwell Tech-funded community center. Despite Ryan's protests, the center, a vibrant space filled with books, computers, and art supplies, was bustling with children and families on the day of the ceremony. Ryan stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with Eleanor by his side. "This center is just the beginning," he said. "It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we prioritize people over profits. And none of this would have been possible without Eleanor Hawthorne." The crowd erupted in applause, and Eleanor, though visibly frail, stood and waved. Her smile was radiant, and for a moment, she seemed as strong as ever. That evening, back at Eleanor's apartment, Ryan helped her settle into her favorite armchair. They talked late into the night, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter. At one point, Eleanor handed him a small leather-bound notebook. "This is for you," she said. "It's everything I've learned over the years. Lessons, ideas, reflections. Use it to guide you when I'm gone." Ryan held the notebook as if it were a sacred artifact. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make you proud." "You already have," she replied with a gentle smile. Meanwhile, the forces opposing Ryan's reforms were becoming increasingly aggressive. Richard Wallace, a disgruntled former executive, had begun spreading damaging rumors about Caldwell Tech's initiatives, claiming they were a cover-up for deeper corruption. One evening, Meredith burst into Ryan's office with urgent news. "We've uncovered a connection between Wallace and some of the companies we're competing with," she said, handing him a folder. "They're funding a smear campaign against us." Ryan felt his frustration mounting. "We need to get ahead of this," he said. "Schedule a press conference. If they want a fight, we'll give them one." The press conference, held in Caldwell Tech's newly refurbished headquarters, was pinked with reporters eager to dissect the controversy. Ryan stood at the podium, flanked by Meredith, George, and a small team of trusted advisors. Eleanor watched from the front row, her presence a quiet anchor amidst the chaos. "I'm here to address the rumors surrounding Caldwell Tech," Ryan began. "Yes, we've made mistakes in the past, but we're not running from them. We're confronting them head-on. Our commitment to transparency and accountability is unwavering." He detailed the company's progress, citing specific examples of community investments, environmental initiatives, and partnerships with nonprofits. He also called out the smear campaign directly, naming Wallace and his collaborators. "This is not just about Caldwell Tech," he concluded. "It's about setting a new standard for corporate responsibility. And no amount of misinformation will stop us from pursuing that goal." The room erupted into a flurry of questions, but Ryan remained composed, answering each one with clarity and conviction. By the end of the conference, the tide of public opinion had begun to shift in his favor. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor's health declined further. She spent more time resting, but she remained a constant source of inspiration for Ryan. One evening, she asked to visit the community center one last time. Sitting in the bustling space, surrounded by laughter and activity, Eleanor seemed at peace. "This is what it's all about," she said softly. "People coming together, building something beautiful. This is the legacy we leave behind." The next morning, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Ryan was devastated, but amidst his grief, he found solace in the notebook she had given him. Inside the cover was a letter, written in her neat handwriting. "Dear Ryan, if you're reading this, it means my time here is done. But yours is just beginning. Don't let my passing discourage you. Instead, let it fuel your determination. Remember, the greatest changes start with the smallest steps. Keep going. I believe in you. With love, Eleanor." As Ryan closed the notebook, tears streaming down his face, he vowed to honor her words. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, armed with Eleanor's wisdom and his own newfound purpose. The early morning light streamed through the windows of the newly reopened community center. As Ryan arrived with George, Meredith, and a small group of team members, the day marked the official relaunch of the center, a symbol of hope and renewal for the once neglected neighborhood. Volunteers bustled about, setting up chairs and tables for the modest celebration. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mixture of joy and nervous energy. Ryan stood near the entrance, watching families trickle in. Many of them had been directly impacted by the economic collapse that had previously devastated the area. Today, they came not as victims, but as participants in a new beginning. Peter, the former factory worker, who had challenged Ryan's understanding of accountability, approached with his wife and 2 teenage sons. His once hardened expression softened as he extended his hand. "Thank you for following through," Peter said, his voice gruff but sincere. "This center means a lot to us." Ryan shook his hand firmly. "I'm just glad we could make it happen. This is only the start." The event attracted a modest group of journalists, many of whom had been skeptical of Ryan's motives. Cameras flashed as Ryan delivered his speech, standing beside Peter and the other community leaders. "This center is more than a building," Ryan said, his voice steady. "It's a testament to what can happen when businesses and communities work together. It's about giving people the tools they need to rebuild, not just survive." His words, coupled with the heartfelt testimonies of residents, began to shift the narrative. Reporters scribbled notes, and one even murmured to another, "This guy might actually be the real deal." As the day unfolded, Ryan immersed himself in conversations with the attendees. He played games with the children, served food to families, and listened intently to their stories. For the first time, he felt truly connected to something greater than himself. At one point, he joined a group of teenagers gathered around an art station. A girl named Mia shyly showed him a painting she had made of the community center. The vibrant colors depicted a bustling hub of activity, surrounded by a bright sun. "It's beautiful," Ryan said, genuinely impressed. "What inspired you?" Mia smiled hesitantly. "This place makes me feel safe, like things can get better." Her words resonated deeply with Ryan. He realized that creating spaces like this wasn't just about physical structures, it was about fostering hope. Eleanor, seated in a wheelchair near the stage, observed the event with quiet pride. Her presence was a grounding force, a reminder of the journey that had brought them all to this moment. At one point, Ryan knelt beside her, his expression earnest. "This wouldn't have happened without you," he said. "Thank you for believing in me." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with emotion. "You've done the work, Ryan, and you'll continue to do it. That's all I ever wanted." Despite the success of the event, challenges continued to mount. That evening, Meredith informed Ryan of new obstacles. Wallace's smear campaign was gaining traction. In some circles, and a few key investors remained wary of the company's direction. "We're making progress, but it's slow," Meredith admitted. "We'll need a bigger win to really turn things around." Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Then let's make it happen." Unbeknownst to Ryan, Wallace had escalated his efforts. He met secretly with key stakeholders, spinning narratives that painted Ryan as a reckless idealist, with no understanding of corporate realities. Jason Miller, who had initially worked as Wallace's operative, began to question his loyalty after witnessing the positive impact of Ryan's initiatives. Jason found himself torn. The money Wallace offered was tempting, but the transformation he saw in Ryan, both as a person and a leader, was undeniable. One evening, Jason stood outside the community center, watching families leave with smiles on their faces. A pang of guilt twisted in his stomach. The turning point came 2 weeks later, during a meeting with Morgan Enterprises' board of directors. Ryan presented his comprehensive plan for expanding the community-focused initiatives across the company's operations. The plan included restructured budgets, partnerships with nonprofits, and commitments to ethical practices. "This is ambitious," one board member said, her tone skeptical. "But ambition doesn't pay dividends." Ryan took a deep breath. "You're right, it doesn't. But integrity does. The long-term value of these initiatives isn't just about profits. It's about building a brand people trust and respect." The room was silent as the board members exchanged glances. Finally, one of the senior members leaned forward. "You have 6 months to prove this works," he said. "If you can't show measurable success by then, we'll reconsider your position." That evening, Ryan returned to Eleanor's apartment to share the news. She greeted him with a warm smile, but he noticed how pale and frail she looked. "You need to rest," Ryan said gently. "I'm fine," Eleanor insisted, though her voice wavered. As they talked, Eleanor suddenly collapsed, clutching her chest. Panic surged through Ryan as he called for an ambulance. He stayed by her side, holding her hand as they waited for help. "Stay with me, Eleanor," he pleaded. "We're not done yet." Eleanor was rushed to the hospital, leaving Ryan grappling with the fragility of life and the weight of the promises he had made. As he sat in the waiting room, clutching her notebook, he vowed to see her vision through, no matter what it took. The sterile white walls of the hospital room were a stark contrast to the warmth Eleanor had always radiated. Ryan sat beside her bed, holding her frail hand. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but her serene expression belied the physical struggle she faced. "Ryan," Eleanor began, her voice soft but steady. "I've always believed that the mark of a person's life isn't what they accomplish for themselves, but what they leave behind for others." Ryan's throat tightened as he nodded. "You've already done so much, Eleanor. I wouldn't be here without you." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You've always had it in you, Ryan. All I did was help you see it. But now, you have to carry this forward. My time here is ending, but your journey is just beginning." Eleanor handed him a small, weathered notebook. "These are my thoughts, lessons, and hopes. Use them wisely." Ryan clutched the notebook to his chest, a mix of gratitude and sorrow overwhelming him. "I promise, Eleanor, I won't let you down." With Eleanor's words echoing in his mind, Ryan returned to Morgan Enterprises, ready to face the board. The stakes had never been higher. He had 6 months to prove the viability of his vision, but resistance within the company had grown. The boardroom was tense as Ryan entered, flanked by Meredith and George. The board members eyed him with skepticism. their expressions a mixture of doubt and impatience. "Mr. Caldwell," the chairman began, "we've reviewed your proposal, but many of us remain unconvinced. This company has thrived for years on traditional business practices. Your changes are radical and risky." Ryan stood tall, his voice firm. "I understand your concerns, but the world is changing. Consumers are demanding more accountability and transparency. If we don't adapt, we'll be left behind." He proceeded to outline a detailed plan, complete with projections, case studies, and testimonials from the community center's reopening. Meredith supported him with data, while George provided insights into similar initiatives he had seen succeed. One board member leaned forward. "And what about the financial risks? If this fails, we lose not only our reputation, but our profits." Ryan met her gaze. "The greatest risk is doing nothing. We can either lead the charge for change or become a cautionary tale." After hours of heated debate, the board voted. By a narrow margin, they approved Ryan's plan, but with conditions. He had to meet specific benchmarks within 6 months, or risk being removed as CEO. As Ryan left the boardroom, relief washed over him. But it was short-lived. Meredith approached with a grim expression. "Ryan, you need to get back to the hospital. It's Eleanor." He rushed to her bedside, where her breathing was shallow. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," Ryan corrected, tears streaming down his face. Eleanor squeezed his hand weakly. "Goodbye, Ryan. Remember, change starts with small actions." Her hand went limp, and the monitors flatlined. Ryan bowed his head, overwhelmed by grief. Yet, amidst the pain, he felt a profound sense of purpose. Eleanor's legacy would live on through his actions. The following day, as Ryan sorted through Eleanor's belongings, he found a sealed envelope addressed to him. Inside was a letter written in her unmistakable handwriting. "Dear Ryan, if you're reading this, I've already moved on to the next chapter. Don't grieve for me. I've lived a full life and have no regrets. You have so much ahead of you, so many lives to touch. Remember what we talked about. It's not about how much you have, but how much you give. Use your platform to amplify the voices of those who can't be heard. Be brave, even when the path seems uncertain. I'll always be with you, cheering you on. Keep fighting for what's right, and never forget the power of small actions to create big changes. With love." Eleanor. Ryan held the letter close, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. He vowed to honor her memory by continuing the work they had started together. Ryan called a company-wide meeting to share his vision. Employees gathered in the main auditorium, curious but cautious. For many, this was their first glimpse of the new Ryan. Standing on stage, he began, "I've made mistakes, more than I care to admit. But I've learned that true leadership isn't about perfection. It's about listening, adapting, and striving to make a difference." He outlined plans for ethical reforms, community partnerships, and environmental sustainability. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a man driven by a higher purpose. The room was silent, and then, one by one, employees began to applaud. The sound grew, filling the space with a sense of collective hope. Despite the positive momentum, Ryan knew the road ahead would be arduous. Wallace's influence still lingered, and not all stakeholders were convinced. Jason Miller, wrestling with guilt, approached Ryan. "I want to help," Jason said. "I know I've made things harder for you, but I believe in what you're doing." Ryan regarded him for a long moment before nodding. "Then, let's make it right. Together." Jason provided crucial information about Wallace's schemes, allowing Ryan to dismantle the last remnants of corruption within the company. As Ryan prepared for the official launch of the new Morgan Enterprises initiative, he received an unexpected phone call. A journalist had uncovered a hidden scandal tied to Wallace that threatened to implicate the company further. Ryan's grip on the phone tightened. "How bad is it?" "Bad," the journalist replied. "But if you handle this right, it could turn into an opportunity." Ryan exhaled, determination hardening his resolve. "Send me everything you have. I'll handle it." The days following Eleanor's passing were somber, yet filled with resolve. Ryan, with Meredith and George by his side, worked tirelessly to establish the Eleanor Hawthorne Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering underprivileged communities through education, job training, and social support programs. The inaugural event of the foundation was held at the community center Ryan had reopened. The once neglected building now stood as a beacon of hope, adorned with Eleanor's favorite quotes, inscribed on its walls. One read, "True wealth lies not in what we keep, but in what we give." Ryan stood at the podium, his voice steady, despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Eleanor taught me that small actions can create ripples of change. This foundation is not just a tribute to her, but a commitment to continue her legacy." Applause erupted as a group of children from the neighborhood performed a heartfelt song, their voices a reminder of the lives Eleanor had touched. In the midst of his work, Ryan took steps to mend his fractured relationships. He reached out to his estranged younger sister, Lauren, who had distanced herself from him years ago, citing his arrogance and self-absorption. The reunion was tentative, but heartfelt. Over coffee at a modest cafe, Ryan listened as Lauren spoke candidly about the pain his neglect had caused. "You weren't just my brother, Ryan. You were my hero. And then, you disappeared into your own world." Ryan apologized sincerely, tears welling in his eyes. "I lost sight of what mattered. But I'm here now. I want to make things right." Lauren softened, her eyes reflecting the brother she once knew. "It won't be easy, but I'd like to try." Their conversation marked the beginning of a renewed bond, one Ryan was determined to nurture. Back at Morgan Enterprises, the effects of Ryan's reforms were becoming evident. The company implemented policies prioritizing ethical practices, sustainability, and community engagement. Departments once focused solely on profit margins now collaborated on initiatives like reducing environmental impact and supporting local businesses. A particularly impactful project involved partnering with George Whitman to invest in rural areas. They launched a program to provide small businesses with interest-free loans, empowering entrepreneurs to thrive in their communities. Ryan's personal involvement in these initiatives surprised many. He visited project sites, spoke with employees and beneficiaries, and ensured transparency at every level. One day, while touring a manufacturing facility that had adopted environmentally friendly practices, Ryan encountered Peter, the former factory worker, who had once blamed him for his family's struggles. Peter now served as the facility's supervisor, overseeing a team that included some of his old colleagues. "It's good to see you again, Peter," Ryan said, extending a hand. Peter shook it firmly, a faint smile on his face. "You've come a long way, Ryan. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but thank you." News of Morgan Enterprises' transformation spread, earning the company recognition as a leader in corporate responsibility. Ryan was invited to speak at international forums, sharing his journey from selfish ambition to purposeful leadership. At one such event, Ryan shared the stage with leaders from various industries. He spoke candidly about his mistakes and the lessons Eleanor had taught him. "It's not about perfection," he said to the packed audience. "It's about progress." We all have the power to change, not just our companies, but the lives of those around us. The applause was thunderous, but Ryan knew the real measure of success lay not in accolades, but in action. During a routine visit to a community center funded by the foundation, Ryan met a young man named Ethan, who reminded him of himself at a younger age, ambitious but lost. Ethan had dropped out of college to support his family and was struggling to find direction. Ryan took Ethan under his wing, offering mentorship and encouragement. Their conversations ranged from career goals to personal growth, and Ryan found fulfillment in guiding someone who mirrored his own past struggles. One evening, Ethan said, "You've done so much, Ryan. How did you turn your life around?" Ryan smiled, recalling Eleanor's wisdom. "It wasn't easy, but it started with listening to others and to myself, and realizing that change begins with one small step." As Ryan continued to build his legacy, a package arrived at his office. Inside was a collection of documents and a letter. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. There are secrets about Morgan Enterprises that even you don't know. If you want to truly change the company, you'll need to face its past. Ryan's hands trembled as he sifted through the documents, which hinted at a hidden scandal predating his tenure. The implications were staggering. Calling Meredith and George into his office, Ryan laid the documents on the table. "This could undo everything we've worked for," he said gravely. "But if it's true, we have to confront it." George nodded, his expression resolute. "If anyone can handle this, it's you, Ryan." As the trio prepared to uncover the truth, Ryan realized that his journey was far from over. The foundation of change he had built might now face its greatest test, the transformation of Morgan Enterprises into a socially responsible and ethically driven corporation reverberated across the globe. Media outlets praised the company as a pioneer in sustainable business practices, while universities began including its turnaround story in their business ethics curricula. Ryan Caldwell, once vilified as a selfish tycoon, was now heralded as an emblem of redemption. Invitations to speak at international conferences flooded Ryan's inbox. Though initially reluctant, he recognized the importance of sharing his story to inspire others. His first major speaking engagement was at the Global Business Ethics Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. Standing before a packed auditorium filled with CEOs, policymakers, and young entrepreneurs, Ryan spoke with humility and conviction. "My journey began with failure," he admitted. "Failure to see the humanity in others, failure to understand my own purpose. It took a wise woman's guidance and a community's resilience to show me that true success lies in the impact we leave behind." The audience erupted into applause as Ryan concluded his speech. Among the attendees was a group of young entrepreneurs who approached him afterward, eager to learn from his experiences. "Mr. Caldwell," one of them asked, "what's the first step to building a socially responsible company?" Ryan smiled, recalling Eleanor's words, "Start small. Listen to the people you aim to serve, and always remember, it's not about you. It's about the lives you can change." While Ryan's professional life flourished, he found himself drawn back to the roots of his transformation. On a crisp autumn morning, he returned to the train station where he had first met Eleanor. The platform was bustling with commuters, but Ryan felt an odd stillness as he stood in the exact spot where their encounter had unfolded. He visited the soup kitchen, where Eleanor had introduced him to the reality of poverty. The familiar faces of the volunteers greeted him warmly, their smiles tinged with curiosity. "Ryan Caldwell," one of them said, shaking his hand. "We've heard about what you've done. Eleanor would be so proud." Ryan's heart swelled with gratitude. He spent the afternoon helping serve meals, a simple act that reminded him of the values Eleanor had instilled in him. Later, he sat on a bench outside, flipping through the notebook Eleanor had given him before her passing. Each page contained a lesson, a quote, or a reflection, written in her elegant handwriting. One passage stood out. The ripples of kindness are endless. A single act of compassion can echo through generations. One evening, Ryan attended a community meeting at a center funded by the Eleanor Hawthorne Foundation. The attendees were a mix of local leaders, residents, and students eager to contribute to their neighborhoods. As Ryan mingled, a young man named Ethan caught his attention. Ethan shared his story, a college dropout burdened by family responsibilities, struggling to find direction. His ambition and frustration reminded Ryan of himself years ago. "Why are you here tonight?" Ryan asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "I want to make a difference, but I don't know where to start. People like me don't usually get second chances." Ryan placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Let's figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, Ryan mentored Ethan, introducing him to resources and opportunities through the foundation. Their conversations often revolved around overcoming self-doubt and finding purpose. "You've already taken the first step," Ryan told him during one of their meetings. "You're here, and you care. That's more than most people ever do." Amidst the progress, Ryan couldn't ignore the ominous implications of the anonymous package he had received. The documents hinted at unethical practices within Morgan Enterprises long before his tenure, involving bribery, tax evasion, and environmental violations. These revelations could jeopardize everything he had worked to rebuild. Ryan convened an emergency meeting with Meredith, George, and a trusted legal advisor. The group pored over the documents, their expressions growing graver with each discovery. "These records are damning," Meredith said, her voice tight with concern. "If they go public, the fallout could destroy the company." "We can't bury this," Ryan replied firmly. "Transparency has been our cornerstone. We need to address it head-on." George nodded, his expression resolute. "But we need to be strategic. If we're going to reveal this, we have to control the narrative." The team decided to launch an independent investigation, partnering with third-party auditors to ensure impartiality. Ryan prepared a public statement acknowledging the company's past mistakes while reaffirming its commitment to ethical practices. As the investigation progressed, Ryan received an encrypted email from the anonymous sender. The message read, "You're getting close, but there's more you need to uncover. Meet me at the Eleanor Hawthorne Center tomorrow night if you want the full story." The email included no name or contact information, only the time and location. Ryan debated whether to go, aware of the risks, but driven by a need for answers. That night, as he stared at the city lights from his office, Ryan felt a mix of determination and trepidation. He knew this could be the key to uncovering the full truth, or a trap that could undo everything. When morning came, Ryan stood outside the center, the weight of uncertainty pressing on him. As the clock struck the appointed hour, he stepped inside, prepared for whatever lay ahead. Inside the Eleanor Hawthorne Center, the air was heavy with anticipation as Ryan entered a dimly lit room at the back of the building. Sitting at a small table was a man in his late 50s, dressed plainly, but exuding an air of quiet intensity. He gestured for Ryan to sit. "You must be Ryan Caldwell," the man began, his voice steady but laced with weariness. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I worked for Morgan Enterprises decades ago, and I have information you need to hear." Ryan leaned forward, his heartbeat quickening. Marcus revealed a trove of records and first-hand accounts that painted a damning picture of Morgan Enterprises' early operations. These documents implicated high-ranking executives in a web of corruption, from illegal land acquisitions to suppressing worker rights. I was part of it, Marcus admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. I stayed silent for too long, but Eleanor inspired me to come forward. She believed in second chances, and I'm trying to honor her memory by telling you the truth. Ryan felt a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. The revelations threatened to undo the progress he had made, but he knew hiding the truth was not an option. "What do you want me to do with this?" Ryan asked. "Do what Eleanor would have done," Marcus replied. "Bring it to light and make it right." Back at his office, Ryan gathered his most trusted advisors, Meredith, George, and Emma. Together, they devised a plan to confront the company's dark past while preserving the integrity of its future. They decided to create a multi-phase initiative aimed at reparations and restorative justice. Phase 1 involved publishing a detailed report of the company's historical wrongdoings, complete with apologies and commitments to rectify the damage. Phase 2 included establishing a community justice fund, financed by company profits, to directly support the individuals and communities harmed by past practices. This fund would also finance scholarships, healthcare programs, and small business grants. Phase 3 focused on legislative advocacy, with Morgan Enterprises pushing for policies that would prevent such corporate malpractices in the future. As the team finalized the plan, Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Eleanor's legacy would not only be preserved, but expanded, creating tangible change for generations to come. The day Morgan Enterprises released its report, the world watched with bated breath. Ryan stood at a podium, flanked by George and Meredith, as he addressed a crowd of journalists and stakeholders. "For too long, our company has benefited from practices that caused harm to innocent people and communities," Ryan began, his voice steady. "Today, we acknowledge those mistakes and commit to making amends. Transparency and accountability will guide every step we take moving forward." The reaction was swift and polarizing. Critics accused Ryan of trying to distract from current issues, while supporters praised his courage and leadership. Social media buzzed with debates, but one thing was clear. Ryan's bold move had captured the public's attention. Amid the controversy, stories began to surface of individuals impacted by the new initiatives. A farmer whose land was unfairly taken years ago received a grant to rebuild his business. A young woman was awarded a scholarship to study environmental science. These stories gradually shifted the narrative, showcasing the tangible impact of Morgan Enterprises reforms. As the initiatives took off, Ryan found himself reflecting on his journey. On a quiet evening, he visited Eleanor's grave, carrying a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flower. The epitaph on her headstone read, "A life spent in service is a life well lived." "Eleanor," Ryan said softly, his voice tinged with emotion, "I hope I've made you proud. You showed me what it means to live with purpose, and I promise to carry your lessons forward." The visit brought Ryan a sense of closure, but it also reignited his drive. He realized that Eleanor's lessons weren't just for him. They were meant to inspire others. Morgan Enterprises' transformation attracted global attention, leading to partnerships with organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. Ryan was invited to speak at the Sustainability and Ethics Summit, where he unveiled a new initiative, the Eleanor Hawthorne Fellowship. This program aimed to empower young leaders working on community-driven solutions to social and environmental challenges. During his speech, Ryan shared Eleanor's story, her impact on his life, and her unwavering belief in the power of small acts to create big change. She taught me that true leadership isn't about power or profit, Ryan said. It's about lifting others, about leaving the world better than you found it. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but Ryan's thoughts drifted to a quiet kitchen table where Eleanor had first challenged him to see the world differently. As Ryan's initiatives expanded, he received a letter from Ethan, the young man he had mentored earlier. Ethan was thriving, leading a grassroots organization that focused on affordable housing. The letter included an invitation to speak at one of Ethan's community events. When Ryan arrived, he was moved by the vibrant atmosphere and the passionate people Ethan had mobilized. After the event, Ethan approached him, gratitude evident in his expression. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," Ethan said. "Now, it's my turn to pay it forward." The encounter reminded Ryan of the ripple effect Eleanor had spoken about. Her lessons had passed through him to others, creating a chain of positive change. Just as Ryan felt his work was gaining momentum, he received an anonymous package containing alarming information about another corporation engaging in unethical practices. The documents revealed a pattern strikingly similar to Morgan Enterprises' past wrongdoings. Included was a note that read, "Your fight isn't over. They need someone to stand up for them. Will you answer the call?" Ryan's jaw tightened as he realized the journey Eleanor had set him on was far from over. With a deep breath, he picked up the phone to assemble his team. What would you have done if you were in Ryan's shoes? Could you leave everything behind to change your life or someone else's for the better? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you've been inspired by Ryan and Eleanor's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. There's so much more to come. Tales of redemption, love, and the power of small actions to create big changes. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.